the sun bled across the horizon, painting Red Hollow in hues of violent orange and weary crimson. For Elias Cade, watching from the high ridge ranch he shared with his war-scarred brothers, the daily spectacle was a familiar lament. Below, the dust of the railroad's ambition still settled over a town built on desperation and a thin veneer of civility. They called themselves prosperous, these Red Hollow folk, their storefronts deceptively clean, their council chambers echoing with pronouncements of order. But Cade knew the desert held secrets, and beneath the baked earth of this sacred tribal land, darker whispers persisted. He'd seen enough of humanity shadowed during the war to recognize the subtle rot. 3 figures moved across the mesa below, small against the vast expanse. Maldo Reyes, gruff and silent, coaxing a hesitant calf. Warren Griggs, his gaunt frame silhouetted against a distant rock formation, a hand resting on an ancient petroglyph. And Jonah Marks, his voice a low hum as he tended to a limping horse, the soft cadence of a healer. 4 men bound by the cruelties of a war long over, but never truly gone, finding a fragile peace in this forgotten corner of the New Mexico frontier. They sought no trouble, asked for no quarrel, content to let Red Hollow's superstitions gnaw at its own, leaving them undisturbed on their isolated perch. That peace, however, was a luxury for those who could afford it. In Red Hollow, women were vessels, their worth measured in progeny and silence. Order was maintained by an alderman council whose judgments were as harsh and unyielding as the desert wind. Today, the wind carried a new cruelty, a chilling edict that cut through the placid hum of evening. Whispers reached Cade even on the ridge, carried by the infrequent rider, amplified by the stark silence of the evening. A young girl, Mira Langley, barely 17, condemned not by deed, but by fate. Cursed by God, they called her infertile, an affront to their twisted piety. The punishment? Earth burial. Entombed up to her neck beneath the scorching sun of the red desert, a living sacrifice to a distorted faith. Cade's jaw tightened. He'd seen such rituals before in other forgotten towns, in the bloody wake of a war that had twisted men's souls. He'd followed orders then, carried out the unspeakable, but that man was gone, buried deep beneath the guilt-ridden stoicism of Elias Cade. He looked out at the fading light, the last gleam reflecting off the metallic glint of the railway tracks that had brought so much and yet so little progress. Below, Red Hollow was a smudge of faint lamplight, a beacon of human depravity. No one else would lift a finger. But Cade, haunted by the echoes of his past, knew he had to. As the last sliver of sun vanished, casting the world in ominous shadow, he walked to the corral, his hand finding the warm flank of Firemane, his red stallion, a silent promise to the girl buried beneath the red soil. G-wind howled. A band's. He wailed that whipped sand into stinging clouds, blurring the already desolate landscape. Elias Cade, bent low over Firemane's neck, squinted against the onslaught. This was no ordinary desert storm. It felt alive, a cruel guardian of Red Hollow's secrets. Hours had passed since he'd ridden out, guided by grim determination and a prayer to a god he hadn't believed in for years. He knew the general direction, the red rock outcroppings where the eldermen sometimes performed their cleansings. But finding a buried body in this maelstrom was like seeking a ghost in a sandstorm. Then, through a momentary lull in the swirling dust, he saw her. A small form, just a head and shoulders rising from the earth, barely discernible from the ruddy dunes. Mira. Her skin, stark white against the red soil, was already severely sunburned, cracked and peeling around her lips. Her eyes, open but unfocused, stared blankly at the chaotic sky. She was delirious, but alive. A desperate spark of triumph ignited in Cade's chest, quickly extinguished by the grim reality of her state. He dismounted, spade in hand, heart hammering against his ribs. The earth was hard-packed, unyielding, as if refusing to release its cursed burden. Every shovelful was a battle against the elements and the clock, the sand filling in as fast as he dug it out. Finally, with a Herculean effort, he freed her. Her body, stiff and unresponsive, was lighter than he expected, a testament to her ordeal. He wrapped her in his serape, a small, fragile bundle, and carefully hoisted her onto Firemain. The ride back was slow, agonizing. He dodged unseen obstacles, his face a grim mask against the biting sand, his mind already churning with what came next. Justice, he knew, would not be found in the wind. He reached the ranch as the storm began to subside, the sky a bruise of purple and gray. Jonah was waiting, his brow furrowed with concern. Without a word, Cade dismounted, carrying Mira gently toward the cabin. Jonah quickly took charge, his skilled hands tending to her burns, forcing water down her throat. Warren and Maldo watched, silent and grim. The fragile peace of the ranch was shattered. The very next day, a rider from Red Hollow appeared, not in friendship, but in accusation. The ealdormen had declared Elias Cade a heretic, a betrayer of their faith, a spoiler of their sacred order. He, who had once traded with them, helped bring supplies across the treacherous trails, was now anathema. Suddenly, the land he'd sought refuge in was a trap. Jonah, ever the voice of caution and wisdom, relayed the grimmer news. Bounty hunters were asking questions in town, their eyes sharp with greed. The desert, once a refuge, now harbored threats, both natural and man-made. Cade knew his next move would not only define him, but perhaps determine the survival of everyone he cared for. Mira's recovery was slow, agonizing. For days, she drifted between lucidity and delirium, her frail body battling the ravages of sun, exposure, and starvation. Elias Cade rarely left her side, the grim line of his mouth softening only when Jonah reported a flicker of improvement. In those quiet hours, as Jonah meticulously applied poultices and Maldo kept constant vigil, Warren Grix, restless and watchful, began to explore the hidden crevices of the surrounding mesa. He spoke little as was his way, but his eyes, sharp and distant, seemed always to be seeing beyond the immediate landscape. One evening, by the flickering firelight, Mira stirred. Her voice, hoarse and thin, was barely a whisper as she began to speak, revealing fragments of her past. She was not a Langley by birth, she explained, but adopted. Her true father, a drifter, had been hanged for horse theft, a common enough tragedy in this wild land. More profoundly, her biological mother had been a native healer, her life extinguished by the very railroad expansion that had brought settlers like those in Red Hollow to this contested ground. This revelation struck Cade with a cold clarity. He remembered those desperate times, the land clearing, the displacements, the vague unease he'd felt. He had been complicit, a sharpshooter for a cause he now questioned, involved in actions that cleared the path for such towns and their twisted interpretations of justice. He remembered similar cleansing rituals in another settlement, scenes he'd tried to bury, now resurfacing with a terrifying vividness. His guilt festered, intertwining with Mira's fragile story. It was Warren who finally brought the pieces together. He returned from the mesa, dust-covered, his face etched with a strange reverence. He carried sketches, charcoal rubbings from a hidden cave. Ancient tribal drawings depicted a female figure, half-buried, a moon maiden trapped by the earth, destined to rise again to bring balance to a corrupted land. Warren, his voice low and solemn, spoke of prophecies and distortions, of old wisdom twisted by new fears. They thought they buried a curse, he rumbled, but they buried a prophecy. As Warren spoke, Cade looked at Mira, still frail, but with a growing light in her eyes. The twisted superstition of Red Hollow, the ealdorman's cruel edict, suddenly coalesced into a profound, damning revelation. Mira was not cursed. She was the buried moon maiden, a symbol of suppressed justice, of truth trying to break free. Protecting her was no longer merely an act of conscience, but an urgent, necessary act of redemption for his own shadowed past. The path forward became clear, stark, and dangerous. They would not hide. They would ride back into Red Hollow, not under the cover of night, but in broad daylight, The four, bonded by war and now by a shared purpose, would bring Mira and the truth back to a town that had tried to bury both. Techi's son, high and unforgiving, beat down on Red Hollow. It was market day, and the dusty main street teemed with the usual mix of ranchers, merchants, and townsfolk. Chatter and bartering filled the air, a false sense of normalcy cloaking the town's ugly heart. Then a hush fell, spreading like an ominous shadow from the edge of town. Heads turned. Conversations died. From the shimmering heat haze on the Mesa Road rode four figures, silhouetted against the stark desert landscape. Elias Cade led the way on Firemane, his jaw set, eyes fixed on the heart of Red Hollow. Beside him rode Jonah Marks, his expression resolute. Behind them, Warren Grix, wild-eyed and silent, and Maldo Reyes, grim and determined. And riding between Cade and Jonah, held protectively, was Mira. No longer the frail, sun-scorched victim, she sat tall, her gaze steady, a quiet strength radiating from her. They rode slowly, deliberately, the only sound the rhythmic thud of hooves on the parched earth, amplified by the sudden, profound silence of the town. Every eye was on them. Every face, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and recognition. They halted in the town square, directly before the Elderman's building, where Judge Harold Stone, his face already a thundercloud, and the other council members stood on the raised veranda, their authority challenged by this defiant arrival. Cade dismounted, his movements economical, his hand never far from his sidearm. People of Red Hollow. His voice boomed, cutting through the heavy air, carrying the force of long-suppressed conviction. You have been led astray. These men, he gestured to the Elderman, are not saviors. They are sinners. Judge Stone, his face reddening with rage, stepped forward. Elias Cade, you ride in here like a common outlaw, harboring a condemned girl. Return her to the earth, as ordained by God's will, or face the consequences. Before Cade could respond, Jonah Marks stepped forward, a thick leather-bound ledger clutched in his hand. God's will, Judge? Jonah's voice, calm and clear, carried far beyond the Elderman's porch. Or man's greed? He opened the book, its pages filled with neat, damning script. This ledger, found in your own courthouse, details every condemnation, every earth burial, and for each, the subsequent acquisition of property, the bribes from eager new husbands. You profit from fear. You profit from suffering. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Faces turned from the Elderman to the ledger, then back to Mira. The veneer of piety cracked, exposing the venal truth beneath. Judge Stone's eyes narrowed, shifting from anger to cold, desperate fury. Faced with exposure and the crumbling of their authority, the Eldermen made their move. A shot rang out. The confrontation exploded into chaos. Techi's first shot ripped through the air, aimed squarely at Mira. Maldo, ever loyal, reacted instinctively, throwing himself in front of her. The impact sent him sprawling, a dark stain blossoming on his chest. Maldo! Mira cried, a gasp of horror. But the shock was brief, quickly replaced by the roar of gunfire. The Eldermen, their faces contorted with fear and fury, opened fire from the porch. Jonah RK's pistol barked twice, precise and deadly. Sheriff Thompson, who had raised his rifle, clutched at his throat before collapsing onto the dusty boardwalk. The crowd scattered, screaming, seeking cover behind stalls and wagons. The market square became a furious, chaotic dance of lead and splintering wood. Warren Grix, vanished from sight with the first shot, reappeared behind the Elderman's building. 2 smoke bombs arced through the air, landing amidst the council members, blossoming into thick, choking clouds. Coughing and disoriented, their ranks divided, their aimed shots going wild. It was a phantom war. Cade, his sharpshooter instincts reawakened, moved with a fluid, deadly grace. He returned fire, his shots clean, methodical, forcing the Eldermen back, pinning them down. But his gaze, sharper than his aim, sought out Judge Harold Stone. Stone, eyes burning with a fanatical zeal, stepped from the cover of the porch, a long-barreled Colt in his hand. The square emptied, leaving only a few terrified souls huddled in doorways, watching the inevitable. It was a duel, stark and primitive, steeped in the ancient codes of the West. Men against man, conviction against corruption. Cade and Stone circled each other in the swirling dust, their boots scuffing the silence. The tension was a palpable thing, thick as the rising heat. Stone, driven by a twisted belief in divine right, raised his pistol. Cade's hand, a blur of motion, met him. The crack of his shot echoed through the square, sharp and final. Judge Harold Stone staggered, his eyes wide in disbelief, then crumpled to the earth, raising a small cloud of dust. Silence descended, heavy and absolute, broken only by the ragged breaths of a few onlookers. The eldermen, leaderless and exposed, dropped their weapons, their faces pale with defeat. In the sudden stillness, Mira, who had been shielding the wounded Maldo, rose. Her face, no longer pale with terror, glowed with an inner resolve. She walked to the center of the square, standing over the fallen Judge Stone, her voice strong and clear, cutting through the lingering tension. "I am not cursed," she declared, her eyes sweeping over the silent, shaken faces of the townsfolk. This town was. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered witnesses, pregnant with dawning understanding. From the ashes of the shootout, a new truth, fierce and unyielding, had arisen in Red Hollow. The silence that followed Mira's pronouncement was not empty. It was heavy with the weight of revelation, of shattered illusions. The townsfolk, witnesses to the raw, violent truth, looked at each other, then at the fallen eldermen and their dead sheriff. The rigid structure of their perceived order had crumbled in a matter of minutes. In the days that followed, the dust settled, but Red Hollow was forever changed. The remaining eldermen, stripped of their power and authority, faced the wrath of a town finally free from their oppressive grip. New voices emerged. Owned the stunned populace. Women, long silent and subjugated, spoke up, their quiet strength now undeniable. Freedmen, who had lived on the fringes, found their voices joining the swell for justice. In a series of tense, often emotional town meetings, a new council was formed, its composition radically different. Women and freedmen now held seats, their perspectives finally valued. The barbaric practice of earth burial was abolished, denounced as the cruel superstition it was. The ledger Jonah had presented became a testament, a grim historical record of the town's dark past, ensuring such atrocities would never be forgotten or repeated. For Elias Cade, the battle was over, but the war within remained. He had faced his demons in the dusty square, had found a measure of redemption in defending the innocent. But the idea of leadership, of becoming a symbol, was an anathema to his weary soul. He was a man of action, not of titles. With Maldo recuperating slowly, under Jonah's watchful care, Cade knew it was time to move on. He spoke to Jonah and Warren. Old habits died hard, and the open road, the quiet solitude of the mesa, called to them. They were storm riders, truth bringers, and their work in Red Hollow was done. One morning, before the sun had fully risen, a silent agreement passed between them. They gathered their gear and rode out, leaving Red Hollow to forge its own future. Mira, however, stayed. She was offered a place on the new council, but quietly declined. Her path was different. The old, neglected schoolhouse, a symbol of a forgotten future, became her new home. She took up residence amidst the dusty textbooks and empty chalkboards, ready to teach another kind of lesson. She became the town's new healer, using the knowledge her native mother likely possessed, but also its teacher, imparting not just reading and numbers, but the lessons of resilience, of truth, and of the power of one voice against oppressive silence. They say in Red Hollow, as the sun dips below the mesa, casting long, lonely shadows across the desert, that justice rode in 4 shadows, storm riders from the ridge who dug up the truth from the buried earth. And a girl buried by fear, condemned by ignorance, became the roots that broke the chains of superstition. and sprouted a new future for a fractured land. From the moment Elias Cade hoisted Mira onto Firemain, a fragile, sun-scorched bundle of defiance, he knew their fight was far from over. Mira's physical recovery was meticulously overseen by Jonah, his hands gentle as he applied salves to her burns, his voice a steady reassurance. Maldo, the gruff ranch hand, maintained a silent, watchful vigil, a testament to his unspoken loyalty. But it was the quiet, wild-eyed Warren Griggs who spent hours, days even, away from the ranch, returning only when the sun dipped below the mesa, his face ever more thoughtful. He explored the hidden caves and ancient rock shelters that dotted the landscape, a place Red Hollow's whitest ettlers carefully avoided, deeming it haunted. One evening, as the last light faded, Warren returned to camp, a roll of charcoal rubbed paper in his hands. He spread them on the dusty ground, illuminated by the flickering firelight. Crude but powerful images emerged. Figures dancing around a central form, one prominently depicting a person buried up to their neck in the earth. The people of the old earth, Warren murmured, his voice hushed. They told a tale of the buried moon maiden. He pointed to another drawing, intricate and resonant. She was interred by a cruel chief long ago for speaking truths he sought to silence. But the spirits of the land would not allow it. They say she would rise again, a beacon to bring justice to a corrupt leader and heal a broken land. Cade's breath itched. He looked from the ancient depiction to Mira, now sitting up, watching with a quiet intensity. The chilling irony hit him with the force of a physical blow. The Eldermen, in their ignorance and fear, had twisted an ancient prophecy into a monstrous punishment. Mira wasn't cursed. She was the embodiment of that very prophecy, a living symbol of a sacred truth distorted by settler superstition. The weight of his own past descended, heavy and suffocating. He remembered the dark days from the war, the forced displacements of native families from this very land, an unspoken pact with the land's original inhabitants broken by the surge of westward expansion, actions he himself, directly or indirectly, had once been a part of. He had even witnessed twisted rituals, similar in their cruel intent, in another town. Protecting Mira was no longer just about saving an innocent life. It was about redemption for the very land they stood on, a chance to set right the echoes of his own past complicity. The four men exchanged glances. The unspoken questions hung in the air. What next? Who were they to challenge a town's deeply ingrained beliefs? But then, Elias Cade looked at Mira and saw not a victim, but the rising moon maiden, the catalyst for change. The decision solidified, clear and unwavering. They would not hide on the ridge. They would ride back into Red Hollow, not under the veil of night, but in the glaring light of day. 4 war-scarred men, and a girl who would not be buried, ready to confront the darkness that had held a town captive for far too long. The immediate aftermath of the showdown was a disorienting mix of gunfire echoes and stunned silence. Maldo, clutching his side, was quickly attended to by Jonah, whose medical expertise, honed on battlefields, proved invaluable. The Eldermen, scattered and defeated, offered no further resistance, their authority shattered along with Judge Stone's life. The townsfolk, previously cowering, slowly emerged, their collective gaze shifting from terror to a dawning, confused recognition. Mira, standing tall amidst the chaos, her voice still echoing in their minds, was the undeniable focal point. Her words, "I am not cursed, this town was," had pierced the veil of their collective delusion. Justice, raw and uncompromising, had been delivered not by law, but by a forced reckoning. The town, shaken to its very foundations, began the arduous process of rebuilding, not just structures, but its very identity. In the ensuing days, a new council was elected, propelled by the outrage and the newfound courage Mira and the four had ignited. Women's voices, long suppressed, rose in the deliberations, and freedmen, who had long suffered in the shadows, were finally given a platform. The archaic practice of earth burial was swiftly and unanimously abolished, scorned now as the barbaric superstition it truly was. The ledger Jonah had brandished became a stark and undeniable testament, a permanent scar on Red Hollow's memory, ensuring such injustices would not fester again. Once Maldo was stable and on the slow road to recovery, murmurs began about Elias Cade. Some spoke of him leading the new council, of becoming a symbol of change. But Cade, a man burdened by ghosts, not seeking glory, quietly declined. He had played his part. His aim was not to govern, but to seek a quiet peace he hadn't known since before the war. The call of the open mesa, the vast, forgiving expanse of the desert, was too strong. So, one morning, before the first tendrils of dawn stretched across the sky, Elias Cade, Jonah Marks, and Warren Grix rode out from Red Hollow. They slipped away as silently as they had arrived, leaving the town to forge its own future. They were storm riders, not settlers, destined to wander the untamed edges of the frontier, their stories fading into legend. Mira, however, stayed behind. She recognized a different calling. The old, neglected schoolhouse, formerly a dusty shell, became her sanctuary, then her purpose. She took up residence amidst its empty desks and forgotten chalkboards, cleaning, mending, breathing new life into a place that had symbolized past neglect. She became the town's new healer, her hands now tending to physical wounds rather than spiritual ones. And she became its teacher, her voice, once almost silenced, resonating with stories of justice, resilience, and the enduring power of truth. As the sun sets over the boundless desert, painting the sky in fiery hues, the empty trails wind on, silent witnesses to history. They say in Red Hollow, nestled beneath the vast, star-strewn sky, that justice rode in on four shadows, storm riders from the ridge who dug up the truth from the earth. And the girl, once buried by fear and superstition, became the very roots that broke the chains, allowing a new, more just Red Hollow to flourish in the harsh, beautiful landscape. The first crack of a rifle shattered the unsettling silence, and then the town square erupted. It was a chaotic symphony of shouts, scattering footsteps, and the sharp reports of gunfire. The eldermen, their faces contorted with a desperate, trapped fury, aimed their weapons at Cade and his companions. Maldo Reyes, ever the protector, moved like a shot. As the first bullet whizzed towards Mira, he threw himself in front of her. A sickening thud, and Maldo gasped, staggering, a dark, spreading stain blooming across his shirt. Maldo. Mira's voice was a cry of anguish, quickly lost in the din. Jonah Marks reacted instantly, his revolver clearing its holster with practiced speed. 2 quick shots rang out. Sheriff Thompson, who had been leveling his own firearm, clutched at his chest, his eyes wide in disbelief as he collapsed in a heap before the elderman's porch. Chaos reigned, townsfolk screamed, diving for cover behind upturned market carts and sturdy barrels. Warren Grix, his movements fluid and silent as a desert cat, had already peeled away at the first sign of aggression. He reappeared moments later, outflanking the surprised elderman's positions. 2 small, dark spheres arced through the air, landing amidst the council members on the porch. With a hiss, they belched thick white smoke, instantly obscuring their targets. Coughing and disoriented, the elderman's aim went wild, their shots tearing harmlessly through the air as Warren's tactic divided and disoriented their ranks. Cade, now fully immersed in the violent rhythm of conflict, moved with the precision of a trained sharpshooter. His 6-shooter barked, forcing the remaining eldermen to cower behind whatever cover they could find, their panicked shots scattering wide. But Cade's true focus narrowed, his gaze locking onto Judge Harold Stone. Stone, his face etched with fanatical fervor, emerged from the choking smoke, a long-barreled Colt gripped firmly in his hand. The square emptied, leaving only the 2 men, framed by the chaos of a town transformed. The air crackled with a primal tension as Cade and Stone began to circle each other in the swirling dust, remnants of the smoke bombs still clinging to the air. It was a dance of death, ancient and unforgiving. Stone, fueled by his distorted beliefs, raised his pistol, conviction burning in his eyes. Cade's hand moved in a blur, a whisper of leather against metal. His shot was precise, instantaneous. The crack of his firearm echoed, a sharp, clean sound that cut through the lingering tension. Judge Harold Stone gasped, his eyes wide with disbelief. Then, slowly, agonizingly, he crumpled to the dusty ground. A profound silence descended upon Red Hollow, broken only by the ragged breaths of the few onlookers. The remaining eldermen, their leader fallen, lowered their weapons in utter defeat. From the midst of the chaos, Mira, who had been kneeling beside Maldo, now rose. She stood tall, radiating a quiet, fierce power. Her voice, clear and resonant, sliced through the stunned air, echoing the truth that had just been unearthed. "I am not cursed," she declared, her gaze sweeping over the silent, shaken faces of the townsfolk. This town was. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered witnesses, pregnant with dawning comprehension. The violence had cleared the path, and now, finally, the truth could be seen. With the dust settled and the elderman's last vestiges of power crumbled, Red Hollow found itself in an unfamiliar, unsettling quiet. The silence was not peaceful, but a pregnant pause before a new beginning. Maldo, though wounded, was in the capable hands of Jonah, whose medicinal skills were proving as vital as his aim. The townspeople, still reeling from the violent upheaval and the damning revelations of the elderman's ledger, began the arduous work of self-governance. The immediate aftermath saw an outpouring of long-suppressed frustrations and desires for change. Whispers grew into demands, and within days, a new town council was democratically formed, a stark departure from the self-appointed eldermen. For the first time, women, long relegated to the roles of wives and mothers, were listened to, their wisdom sought, and several were even elected to office. Freedmen, who had endured silent subjugation, found their voices rising in the town squares, demanding and receiving their rightful place in the community. The barbaric practice of earth burial, revealed as nothing more than a tool for exploitation and land grabbing, was formally and irrevocably abolished. The grim ledger, a tangible symbol of the town's corrupted past, was publicly displayed, a stark reminder and a solemn promise that such tyranny would never again take root. As the town slowly began to heal its wounds and rebuild its civic structure, Elias Cade found himself at a crossroads. Many looked to him as a hero, a reluctant leader, a man who had brought down the corrupt and ushered in a new era. They offered him positions, roles of authority. But Cade, deeply burdened by his past as a sharpshooter, a man who had followed orders that led to countless miseries, shrank from the spotlight. He had sought justice, found redemption, but had no desire for a pedestal. His place, he knew, was not in the halls of power, but on the open range. He was a storm rider, not a governor. With Maldo on the slow mend towards recovery, Cade, Jonah, and Warren made their quiet goodbyes. There were no grand pronouncements, no farewell speeches. Under the cloak of dawn's first light, as Red Hollow still slept, they rode out. Their journey was not to another town, but to the vast, untamed expanse of the mesa, where the wind scoured away memory and the sky offered boundless freedom. They were men of the wild, and there they would remain. Mira, however, decided to stay. She declined any political office, but her vision for Red Hollow was clear. She took possession of the old, neglected schoolhouse, a physical manifestation of Red Hollow's past and a beacon for its future. She dusted off the textbooks, repaired broken panes, and filled the empty rooms with light and purpose. She became the town's new healer, her touch gentle, her knowledge growing. And she became its teacher, her voice, once almost silenced by fear and superstition, now ringing clear with lessons of knowledge, justice, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. As the sun sets over the boundless desert, casting hues of orange and purple across the vast horizon, the wind whispers tales through the empty trails. They say in Red Hollow, nestled beneath the vast star-strewn sky, that justice rode in on 4 shadows, storm riders from the ridge who dug up the truth from the earth. And the girl, once buried by fear and superstition, became the very roots that broke the chains, allowing a new, more just red hollow to flourish in the harsh, beautiful landscape, forever remembering the day the buried girl rose to teach them true freedom.